Hello there and welcome to another Bobeats Synthesizer review, and today we're actually in my new studio, so sorry about the mess. I'm currently moving between two studios. This is the space that we built in our new house. And in today's video, which is the first that I've shot in this new studio, we're checking out a very special synth, the Solar 42. It's a new synth that builds on the legacy of the Solar 50, which was this massive drone synthesizer with 50 oscillators, and it improves upon it because the Solar 50 wasn't really that versatile of a synth. It could do cinematic soundscape really well, but it couldn't do a lot more. And the Solar 42, I'm happy to tell you that it truly improves upon the 50, and it's not just a fantastic upgrade, it's a fantastic synthesizer, period. But it might not be a synthesizer for everyone, and we'll talk about that in today's video. And a big thank you to Alta Music for sending the Solar 42 over so I could make this big in-depth video for you all. It's been a labor of love. I spent about 1 week just making music on it, so I hope you put on a pair of headphones, just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ambient ride that you are in for. There are different kinds of synths. There's generalists, synths that are good at a bit of everything and you can't really go wrong with them, something like the Minilogue XD or Take 5 for example. And then there's specialists, synths that are good at specific tasks, like for example the Bass Station 2. It's in the name, it's a bass synthesizer. But then there's the unique category of synths. We're talking about the synthesizers that doesn't try and please everyone, synths that are unapologetic, that are what they are. And because these synths are built for a small niche target demographic, they're usually quite expensive. It's because you're not making a ton of them, or you're not selling a ton of them, so price per unit will be higher. And if you look at the price for the Solar 42, there's just a ton of other synths you could be buying instead. But that's okay, because the Solar 42 is made for a specific small group of people, and for those people, it's a brilliant, fantastic synth. before I get into the nitty-gritty of this synthesizer here, let's talk about the difference between the Solar 50 and the Solar 42. Now, the first important thing is that the Solar 42 has different voice types. The Solar 50 had only one type of voice, whereas the 42 has 3 different types of voices. In practice, this means that the 42 is more versatile, especially in terms of sculpting sounds. One of the biggest problems with the Solar 50 was that it was mono, so the effects was mono, which didn't make any sense at all. And the 42 solves this. It has a stereo output, it has dual filters, polyvox filters, and it also has stereo out for the effects. You can actually load different effects for the left and right channel, which can be fun sometimes, and sometimes it's not something I use. But regardless, it's amazing to see a stereo output because this kind of synth really needs that. Another thing that makes the 42 much more versatile than the 50 is that you not only have a keyboard that you can play, but you also have arpeggiator, you have 2 different kinds of sequencers, and you can also split the keyboard playing, for example, an arpeggio on one part and playing a melody on the other side of the keyboard. And another new thing is the 5-step Buchla style sequencer. That sounds more impressive than it is. It's basically just a 5-step CV gate sequencer, but it's nice, it's there, it's physical, it's something you can use. The mixer section has also been improved. Now you can pan the voices, and that's actually huge for this kind of cinematic synthesizer. So those were the major changes between the 42 and 50, and I can't overstate how much of a difference it makes. The 50, while a cool synthesizer, was a bit difficult to use, especially in a synth setup, whereas the 42, while it doesn't have MIDI, it's much easier to interconnect with other gear that can, for example, send a clock pulse and use CV. So it's a much more versatile synth, not just in terms of sound, but also in terms of connectivity and usability in a larger setup. Before we move on with the overview of the synthesizer, I wanted to talk about something even more important. No, it's not a sponsored message. I wanted to talk about what life is without friends and synths. I had a good friend of mine come over the other week and we shared a moment with the Solar 42. So without any further ado, here is my good friend Berg, or as you might know him, Ollie Laboratories.
Hi Per! Hi Per! We play the synthesizer in Sweden.
Cool kids! Yes, I'm here with Berg.
Hello, hello, hello.
And we've just had some fun with Solar 42.
It feels like a buddy synthesizer, right?
Yeah.
You have your friend over and you could be two persons playing because it's like built and conceived in a way. You have 4 oscillators each. You have your little keyboard, you have your little drones, and you have your own filter.
And you can even, we didn't do it, but you can actually split the keyboard.
You have a friend over,
Yeah.
you have some coffee, and you play some synthesizer together on one of the same machine.
Yeah.
It's like, it's an awesome unit.
And you have one filter each, so you don't have to have a fight about it.
Exactly. I love it. It's the best thing ever.
Next up, I want to go through the different parts of the Solar 42. It might look like an intimidating synthesizer, but it really isn't. It's not that complicated. So this synth has 8 voices. They're located over here, but they're also very different from any other analog synth with 8 voices. They're not standard. So instead, we have these 4 drone voices that are the same, these 2 drone voices that are the same, and these 2 voices which are more standard voices. And we're gonna start here and by using the keyboard. You can not only play using these touch capacitive keys, you can also set it to be an arpeggiator or a sequencer, and there's a bunch of different things we can do here. We can change the clock speed, we can change the direction. We can also add variations and variation note intervals. And by introducing just a bit of effects, so the effect section is over here, we're already on the way to an excellent ambient patch. Over here is a dual filter. It's a polyvox filter. And we can modulate the filter using one of 2 LFOs. They are the same, it's just that this one is slower, this one is faster. And voices 4 and 5 are the same, except that voice 4 has VCO out and this one is sync. So what we can do is bring in oscillator 4, bring in oscillator 5, and as you can see, I have panned them, and this is a new feature. There's panning on the mixer, which is amazing. It's not just for the voices, it's also for the external audio input, as well as the piezo mic pickup here. Yeah, we'll get into a bit of that later. But we have panned the voices, and we can sync them together and bring in the reverb. Now these 2 voices here are pretty standard voices. We have attack, decay, sustain, release envelopes here, and you can control them using the keyboard. You could also control them using some other source, using volt, octave, and the gate input over here. Oh, and also there is a loop functionality, so you can actually loop the envelope here. So we could And if we take a closer look at voice number 4 and 5, you can see that we can select 2 different waveforms. And as you can see here, we have the shape input, attenuator here, pulse width here, and we can get some nice pulse width modulation action going. And with a really high rate of the LFO, you can go to something like this. So you can get a lot of different tones out of this. And we also have an octave range selector and FM on both of the oscillators. Another thing I like to do is using the FM input here and using the little LFO here. Adding a bit of FM and just turning up the rate here. Giving the oscillator this nice little subtle vibrato. Or you could go crazy. Super metallic, FME. But what is not so standard and what makes this synth not for everyone is that the other voices are drone voices. They're not really meant to be sequenced using gate and CV, for example. You can sort of, but the results are a little wonky and yeah, not that predictable. So this first voice here has 5 oscillators and you enable them by pressing these buttons here. And then we have these buttons here that enable the mod, which is the light sensor or whatever you're plugging into the CV input. This is not 1 volt per octave. There's attack, there's release, there's envelope out, there's also gate input. Now some of you might have noticed that there are buttons beside the keyboard that are used to trigger the drone voices, basically on and off. Now these can be used with great effect if you, for example, tune the individual oscillators of a drone voice into, say, a chord. Next up, let's take a look at voice number 3 and voice number 8. They can be played using this little keyboard here. This voice is a little bit different from the standard oscillator that we got here and even this drone oscillator. To simplify it a bit, the sound is generated by FM or AM, or you could just have it as a standard drone sound, and this is what we're listening to now. The second kind of oscillator that we can set up here is an FM oscillator. So basically we're using this knob here to set FM amount, and this is the rate of the frequency. Okay, so we're getting this kind of scattered sound. Let's add in some noise. And we need to modulate the effects. Okay, I kind of got a little carried away there with all that FM madness, but that's also kind of what you're getting with this synthesizer. And you saw me use the joystick. You can use 2 CV outputs here to connect it to something and modulate or control it with the joystick. The joystick is also a new addition to this synthesizer, which is very welcome. It works actually really well. And now what we can do is we can turn that into an amplitude modulated sound, and there is also an FM and AM variation here. So by turning this little switch here up, we get an amplitude modulated sound. So we have a little sequence here, and on the second oscillator we can actually turn up the FM, so we get FM and amplitude modulation. Next up, what I want to show you is splitting the keyboard. So The keyboard can not only be split, so you can play two voices simultaneously, it can also run two arpeggiators, one arpeggiator and playing at the same time, and it can also be used for two different sequencers on each side. And this just makes the Solar 42 much more useful than the 50 in terms of like creating an actual arrangement of sorts. And you also have this, a 5-step sequencer over here. They call it Buchla style. Basically, it's a 5-step CV gate sequencer. You can switch between 3, 5, and 4 steps. You can turn off the gate per step. There's like a pulsar, a BPM knob here. You can clock it, you can send the clock out. So we could actually start by clocking the arpeggiator using this knob here. And we're gonna put it to split. And we can now choose which side we want to edit, and the menu is actually very good. It's a surprisingly small but useful screen. And now what we have to do is we have to patch the gate here, and we have to patch the alt octave. And I'm pretty sure that I've recorded a better demo using the split functionality, so let's listen to that instead of me just messing around here. So another thing that you can do is you can set this side here to be an arpeggiator as well. And let's take a little look at the different settings we have. So we have hold, we have clock. I hope you can see this when I'm zooming in. It's a really small screen, but it's actually quite readable when you're sitting like I am and you're looking down at it. So we have clock speed, and we can change direction. So forward, backward, we have forward and then backward, and then random. So now we have two random sequences running, and the whole variation thing, and the variation note interval, I believe it is. And we can also change the rhythm. And length. We also have this piezo mic pickup, which basically picks up signal when you play here, and you use this preamp here to set the level of it. And it also triggers this envelope follower here, so we get attack release that we can use to trigger a sound, for example, on the device. You also have an external audio input, and you also have voices 4 and 5 as dry outputs over here. In terms of effects, it's the same as on the Solar 50, but we have stereo output here. So we have 3 parameters here. Basically, you just insert one of these little cards that you get with the unit, and then you load them onto the device. So here we have some sort of phaser, I think, on the left side, and reverb on the right side. Okay, last in today's video, we have to put on the teacher jacket, because I got some teacher notes right here, stuff we need to talk about. So let's start with the sound. The sound isn't exactly what you'd call noise-free, and sometimes there's a little bit of scraping noises when you're turning knobs and so on. So it's not a silent analog synthesizer. But then again, if you're looking for like a low noise synth, this sort of more experimental synth is probably not the right pick for you anyway. So I'd say that the noise floor is overall higher than on most analog synths that I've encountered, but it's totally workable, it's totally fine to work with. Now, the effects range is pretty good, like you get a ton of different effects, but some of them feel rather lo-fi in style, and sometimes I feel that this is a little weird because we're aiming for like big cinematic, like vibrant soundscapes. So sometimes I would want like a little bit less of a lo-fi feel to the effect. And the same goes for the Polyvox filters. Like they're nice, but they're also a little bit too aggressive for my taste. So for certain kinds of sound, if you're going atonal, if you're going for something truly experimental, I think that the Polyvox filters are great. But if you're going for these more vibrant, lush soundscapes, big cinematic pads, then maybe they're a little bit harsh, they're on the harsher side. I guess I'm saying that sometimes I'm missing a creamier filter like on a Moog, because it would pair really well with this big cinematic sound. Talking about workflow, that's the biggest strength of the Solar 42. It's a joy to work with, it's a fantastic synth to create sounds on. It's just great, and it's such a huge improvement over the Solar 50. I can't overstate this. They've truly made an effort, and they made what I think will be a sort of iconic synth when it comes to ambient and experimental music. I really do think it's great. In terms of workflow, there are some inconsistencies. For example, when you're turning on modulation for an oscillator on the drone voice, you're pushing down the button. But if you want to turn on the actual oscillator, you're not pushing down because that turns the oscillator off. So there are some small inconsistencies like that. Talking about versatility, it's much more versatile than the Solar 50. However, I wouldn't call it a well-rounded synth. This is a unique synth. It's meant for specific purposes. You basically only have the two standard oscillators and then a bunch of drone stuff. So unless you're looking for a drone synth, then this is probably not it. And in terms of connectivity, while the Solar 42 is a big improvement over the 50, it feels easier to connect because you can clock the sequencers and arpeggiators on it very easily using an external source. You could also use the keyboard on the Solar 42 to play your other URAC stuff. So in terms of connectivity, it's a big step up over the 50. I still miss MIDI, but I'm not sure how they would implement it in any way that makes sense, since the drone voices, you couldn't really reliably play them using MIDI anyway. But maybe just some way to sync it using MIDI, because not everybody has gear with clock out. So yeah, that's something to consider, but it's also at the risk of trying to please everyone and then losing some of its character and originality and personality. So yeah, I'm not sure really where I land on this, but MIDI is always nice. And lastly, let's talk build quality. So overall, this thing is built like a tank. It feels really, really good to play. There's few synths like it, like the Lyra 8 comes to mind. The Pulsar 23 comes to mind. It's just, it's a monster in terms of its physicality, and I really like it. I'm here for it. But I have not used it for a long time, so I don't know how it holds up over a longer period of time. But I will say that there's been a few problems. For example, the hold button on one of my oscillators doesn't properly show if the oscillator tone is being held, and there's also a lot of wobbliness to a certain button, they feel a bit loose. So yeah, I think the build quality overall is fine, but there's small problems like that could probably be fixed with just a little bit more quality control before the unit ships out. So yeah, those were my critical thoughts about it. It's overall a great synthesizer, but at $1,800 or euros, it's also a lot of money. And I think you already know whether or not it's worth that kind of money for you or not. For $1,800, you can get a lot of other synths. So yeah, take it for what it is, an incredible, unique, interesting instrument with personality, and I'm here for it. I love it. And yeah, I hope to see you in a future video. As always, have a great day. Talk to you later.